UFC 287 is upon us, just a couple days away here, and Israel Adesanya is going to attempt to take the belt back from Alex Pereira, the man who stole it from him, right? Knocked him out in the 5th round in their last fight. And man, tall task ahead of Adesanya, especially considering like the background and the history that these two have, right? Having lost to Pereira now 3 times if you count kickboxing, right? But there's kind of like a caveat there, because if you go back and watch the first kickboxing match that Adesanya and Pereira had, I thought Izzy won. Now, the record books don't reflect that, and they don't care what I think, but I felt like he won. And I think that's why there's also so much interest still generated around this fight, because yes, Adesanya got knocked out in the second kickboxing match with that left hook, man, and that's undeniable. When that happens, what can you do? But he got knocked out again in a legitimate stoppage, but Izzy was winning the fight in their MMA bout, in the UFC fight, right? In their title fight, Izzy was winning all the way up until he got knocked out. He might have dropped a round or two in there, but it looked like he was going to go on to beat Pereira. He definitely won the first round because he cracked him and hurt him. Pereira might have got the second. I think Pereira got going there. I think Pereira might have got a takedown in the second. And then I think Izzy came back and took the third. He got pretty wrestling heavy there. And, you know, it looked like Izzy was going to get the win, and then Pereira just poured it on him, man, and started battering him up against the cage, closing his exit routes off, just hitting him with bombs. And he's such a big fucking guy for the weight class. And, man, so my point is Izzy has a tall task in front of him, and, you know, an important one. This is a big fight for his legacy, I think, and for, like, you know, just this matchup in general. It's going to have a lot to do with where Izzy's future goes. And, the thing is it's a tough task, but I think it's an achievable one for him based on like what we've seen so far. So, yeah, we're going to get into all that. But first, I want to talk about a couple news items. Then we'll get into breaking the main card down, right? We'll move from the first fight all the way up to Izzy and Pereira. But yeah, let's talk about a couple of other things before we start breaking the card down. So first, big fight announcement, UFC 290 looks like it's going to get Volkanovski versus Rodrigeuz, right, for the UFC featherweight title. So it looks like Alexander Volkanovski will indeed go back to 145 and defend, or go, I guess, unify, whatever you want to call it, right, the belt against Yair Rodriguez, who, I mean, that fucking win over Josh Emmett was incredible, man. And Yair poses an interesting challenge for Volkanovski, I think, a different challenge than anything he's seen so far. And I think that's why this fight is so intriguing, right? I mean, you can't doubt Volkanovski after seeing the way he came with the... I was going to talk about this later in, you know, the fight breakdowns too. But I really feel that when you get to the super high levels of MMA, like when you're talking about world championship caliber, there's a point, even throughout, if you're really skilled throughout your UFC career, where you will just be able to beat people because you are more skilled than they are. You can make up for having some, like, you know, a little bit, like, lacking a little bit of the knowledge and know-how and some of that, like, you know, even when you're green, but simply because you're skilled, because you're so skilled. But when you get to a legitimate championship caliber, like UFC championship level, it's not enough to just be skilled anymore. And I think the guy that comes with the best game plan is oftentimes the winner. Unless you're fighting like Francis Ngannou, like, fuck, good luck, right? But I think you saw that in John Jones versus Cyril Gane. And I think you've seen that with John Jones throughout his career. But my point is that I think that's what makes Volkanovski so great. And I think that's probably why he'll be a favorite leading into this fight. I think Yair Rodriguez is super dangerous. He poses a bunch of new problems for Volkanovski. But I think Volkanovski is a fucking game plan master. He reminds me of Cejudo and John Jones, right? And, you know, like Demetrius Johnson, some of the greats game plan, right? And they come up with specific ways that they want to attack and beat and like attack their opponents. And I think that's what Volkanovski does. And I think you see that show in his fights. And I think Rodriguez is crazy talented, right? But I think that he is incredibly gifted, but it'll be interesting to see how he game plans for a guy who also poses a lot of problems in Volkanovski. A lot of the times it comes down to game planning in this, and I think Volkanovski is the master of that. So early on, I'm leaning Volkanovski, and I'm thinking he'll be the favorite, but Yair, that's such a good fucking fight. Yair can... The thing with Yair is he's so long and athletic, and he has such great dexterity with his legs. And he generates a lot of power with his kicks, yes, but that dexterity with his legs also comes in handy when he's on the ground. I mean, you saw the way he fucking threw that triangle on Josh Emmett, man. Like, because his legs, he has so much ability to move his legs around. It gives him a big advantage over his opponents. I mean, you hear guys like John Danaher say all the time, when you start using your legs in jiu-jitsu, you know, that's when things really start to become more effective. And he does a great job of using his legs in a lot of those situations, even from the bottom, you know? So it's not just his kicking, it's his ability to do that stuff and wrestle with his legs that makes him challenging. And it'll be interesting to see if Volkanovski is willing to wade into those waters based on what happens to Emmett. My guess is training with Craig Jones, some of the best like jiu-jitsu practitioners in the world who have a very fine understanding of the mechanics of how these moves work. I don't think Volkanovski is going to be afraid to go anywhere. And I think, like I said, that coupled with the game plan, man, early on at least, I'm leaning Volk. Just way too early prediction. But yeah, man, UFC 290 International Fight Week. That's going to look like it's going to be July 8th. And they always put on a huge card for International Fight Week, that July 4th weekend, right? So I think there have been rumors about John Jones and Stipe potentially fighting on that card too. I don't know if anything's official there, but Ariel Helwani put this on his story, or on Instagram, not on a story, and then MMA Junkie announced it. So Volk versus Rodrigeuz looks like it is going to be a go. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about? A couple other things. First, I wanted to give a shout out. I've never actually met him, right? But there's a kid who trains at our gym, Archie Colgan, who just had a big win in Bellator. He picked up a first-round knockout, and he had his name featured in an MMA Junkie headline today, which I thought was pretty cool. The general manager of our gym, Peter Straub, is one of his coaches, I believe. So, pretty cool to see that today. So if you guys see that when you're scrolling through MMA Junkie at all or anything, definitely give it a click, give it some love, right? Kid's super talented. Like I said, I've never rolled with him, but I know our professor, like I said, Peter Straub, has a kind of like a team that he works with pretty often. And like Grant Neal is on there, who also fights for Bellator. I just saw that on Instagram that he got promoted to blue belt. And I've only rolled with him once or twice, but like I was a blue belt when I rolled with him. This was maybe a year ago, and he was a white belt, and I was like, yeah, that's not a fucking white belt. I mean, by jiu-jitsu standards, yeah, kind of, but like in terms of just grappling, like, yeah, the kid was very fucking good. He had a very strong wrestling base. Like, it's just funny that he's like, you see him get promoted to blue belt, and you're like, yeah, but what the fuck am I then? You know, because I have a blue belt, but it ain't the same as that. So that was an interesting experience, but he has, I think, a good team of fighters coming up and a lot of guys in like Bellator and stuff. So a couple guys in Bellator rather. So pretty cool to see. I think he's also maybe helping out with coaching Usman's. I don't talk to him about it a whole lot, but I think he's helping out with Usman's little brother in his upcoming fight. I think against, who was that? Justin Tafa he was matched up against. But anyway, just wanted to kind of shout that out. Let's see. The WWE and UFC crossover. I don't think you're going to see any, like, it's not going to be a big impact as a fan. You're probably not going to see a ton of stuff right away. But these two companies merging and joining like forces, I think might be a big deal for fighters down the road, because it gives them an avenue maybe to start heading in that entertainment direction towards the end of their careers. Like, look at what Ronda was able to do, you know? And they've always had a strong relationship back and forth. I mean, The Rock tying Masvidal's belt on in the BMF title, right? Brock Lesnar obviously coming over and winning the heavyweight championship. I mean, granted, he had a strong collegiate background. But Daniel Cormier now is pretty involved with the WWE and has been for some time, I think. Like, they've always had really strong ties, and rightfully so. I think I think down the road it gives fighters the option to kind of, like I said, maybe start entering that space where it's more about like the entertainment side of the house. And yes, your physical attributes matter. They do. But it's not a fucking fist fight. You know, it's a little bit less pressure off you. You know the outcome before things are rehearsed. I'm sure your body gets beat up, but at least there's a plan there. And I said, like, a lot of emphasis is on entertainment. So there might be an avenue there for fighters to get out a little bit earlier, maybe, not have to take so many, like, hits and damage late in their career and start transitioning over into something that's a little bit more, like I said, entertainment based. That's what, just being realistic. I don't hate wrestling. I grew up watching it. I fucking loved like Sting and all that fucking shit, you know, like Hulk Hogan, all that. But yeah, man, I don't know. I just don't think we'll see any direct impacts of it as like a fan. You're not going to notice anything crazy watching it. I think like the UFC and stuff, you might see a little bit more crossover, but like I said, the ties have always been strong. That's always been going on. This is just kind of official. But like I said, it might make that, you might start seeing guys more and more exploring avenues and people going back and forth. I don't know. Maybe coming from the WWE to the UFC is hard, man. Like Brock Lesnar had a collegiate background, but CM Punk, like, oh, good Lord, that should not have been allowed to happen, you know? But for the opposite direction, UFC fighters going over to the WWE, I think it makes perfect sense. So it just makes sense that these two, like, officially decided to merge together because, I mean, fuck, they've been doing, like I said, the business ties have been so strong for so long that why the fuck not? So anyway, yeah, I wanted to talk about that. And then the last thing is more jiu-jitsu related. And I'll put timestamps on this, guys. I'm going to start talking more about jiu-jitsu because it's like part of my daily life. I coach it, right? I participate in it. It's like really this, like I love MMA as a fan, but like really as a passion, I really like jiu-jitsu. Like it's what I choose to do a lot of my free time with. I spend a lot of time studying it. And obviously I do the grappling breakdowns on here. So I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more, but I'll always book things if you're not interested in this side of the house. But this case that I want to talk about in the jiu-jitsu community that's been getting like, you know, a lot of attention is the Jack Greener case. And if you guys don't know, Jack Greener was unfortunately like, I think temporarily, I'm not sure on the detail. I think he had like a pretty miraculous recovery, but he was paralyzed after rolling with the head instructor of a gym at Del Mar Jiu-Jitsu Club. This was back in 2018, so like 5 years ago in San Diego. So a lot going on here and a lot of different like pieces to this, but Jack Greener was at an open mat. I believe Jack Greener had former competition experience, right? So there's that element to consider. But he was rolling with his instructor, and he was in a turtle position, and his instructor attempted a rolling back take. But he tried it from, man, first off, just not a good setup, and then not a good execution of the technique. He tried to leap up over his student's head and like roll through and take the back. But the student being a white belt, right? First off, the grips weren't there to take the back appropriately. He had like a grip around his arm as opposed to being, you know, like two underhooks or seatbelt grip from that position. He had an arm trapped and I think he had an underhook on the other side. So weird way to take it. And then he tried to leap up over and he didn't even get his own head to the mat. He just jumped. And his partner, this white belt, Jack Greener, didn't know to tuck his head and roll all the way through. There's video of it that you guys can find if you want to look it up. But he didn't know to tuck his head, and he didn't roll through, so he was left like a quadriplegic. And he's laying on the mat there, and the instructor, you can tell, is concerned. And I mean, first things first. I think this is a tragedy for both parties. It's obviously a tragedy that this happened, right? And it's also, it's terrible to be I would hate to be the person that did that to a student of mine that came in. But there are some different elements to consider here. Like first off, I would never try a rolling back take on a new student, but I am also not a black belt. He might have had a lot of confidence in that technique and maybe he traps that arm, and students normally do know to roll through because maybe they know that it's coming. And in this particular circumstance, he ran into a student who just didn't know to do that. Right? Either way, I feel like his grips should have been oriented differently if he was going to pull it off. But, you know, shit happens. Things happen. It is jiu-jitsu. Like, this is what I don't want to get, because I'm going to say something that I don't think most of the jiu-jitsu community will agree with, and it's that I do think that somebody had to be held liable. I was talking about this to my wife, and it's like, whose fault is it? It's not nobody's fault. Somebody has to be at fault here. I mean, the man was left paralyzed. And I know that like the intent might not have been there. You can never assume the intent. And I don't think the guy did it on purpose. I never assume that about anybody who's participating in jiu-jitsu and a guy who got his black belt. Like, I don't assume that at all. I don't assume that I don't think he's trying to hurt the person. I don't think that's most people. You usually, if you're doing jiu-jitsu and you've been doing it that long, you're there to get good and work techniques and just like, yeah, sometimes you're trying to win a roll, but you're never trying to hurt the person like that. Your goal is always to submit and like get them to tap, but never in a way that actually damages them or hurts them, you know? Like most of your training part. That's why you don't hear about situations like that a lot. It's like most of the time, injuries happen. Don't get me wrong. I mean, injuries happen a lot. There are a lot of injuries, but a lot of them, like, you know, they are avoidable, but it's just part of the sport. But this one, with the rolling back take and everything, it's like, you do got to kind of exercise better judgment. And somebody does have to be at fault here. Like, I would hate to be the person that did this, but I would also think that I would consider it my fault. Reviewing it and like looking, I don't know though. I'm not him. I didn't go through it. I don't know how I would feel. It's so hard to say that. It's so hard to say. I'd like to think that that's the like mentality I would have, like knowing it's an accident, but like somebody's responsible here. And it's certainly not the person with less experience. And there's only 2 people involved in the role. I mean, like, and here's the thing: people are really disappointed with Rener Gracie because he was paid $100,000, I guess, to be an expert witness on the case, and he basically said that he gave them his opinion, and he did mention a lot of things. I watched Andrew Wiltsey's rebuttal to this, and Andrew Wiltsey made a lot of good points. I agreed with a lot of the things that Wiltsey said, great. Rener was talking about all these industry standards and stuff, and I don't think those lines are as clear cut as, you know, Rener made them out to be and such. But I do think that this was a potentially dangerous technique applied on a student who might not be prepared for what's coming. And I think that when you're rolling with your students, you have to be aware of that, especially if you're like one of the head instructors that are there or whatever. Like, You're responsible. When I'm rolling with one of my students, I consider myself responsible for their safety. And I just, out of some people have different mentalities on this, but I try especially on newer people. It depends. If you're like a seasoned white belt a little bit, like, and this kid maybe had prior experience, you will turn it up a little bit, but I'm usually not trying, like, I don't know. You're not trying to kill the motherfucker. And I don't know. I just think that you need to use better judgment in those situations and better application of technique and better understand if you're going to do something like that, if you are going to perform a move like that, a better understanding of how the technique works and where your hands need to be positioned in your grips. Like, if it is incorrect and you did try to execute it and the kid was left paralyzed, like, that is your fault. It is. And it's like, it's a tough one, man. It's a tough one. I know that accidents happen and things happen in this jiu-jitsu, and that's a possibility at all times, but like, oh, damn, man. The result, and I know people were also upset with the verbiage that Rener used and said that it was a spike, but it kind of was a spike. He kind of did spike him on his fucking head. He didn't pick him up and fucking tombstone him, but he dropped him on his head. I mean, like, essentially, he took away his ability to post and rolled him through, and then the kid didn't know to roll his head through, and he's the one who caused it. It's a sad reality, but that's my take on it as well. The more I've thought about it and listened to the responses back and forth between both people, man, I do kind of think the instructor has a responsibility there. So anyway, moving on, let's get back to MMA, and let's break down this main card for UFC 287 coming up this weekend. So first fight on the card, and then at the end of this, guys, I'm also going to do something where I'm going to give you guys how I'm betting on the card this weekend. I'm going to track this over the next, year? I don't know. I'm probably going to be terrible at it. Do not take it as betting advice. But I'll provide a link to it in the description in the video here, and I'll track it over the next year or so, right? And I'll make sure that it's clear, the units and everything that I'm using in the spreadsheet and all that. But if you guys are interested in following that, at the end of the video, after I give my picks, I'll go back through and let you guys know who I'm betting on throughout the whole card, right? So anyway, like I said, don't take my advice on it. It's just there to track and see how the fuck I do. I'll probably end up down a lot of money, but it is what it is. All right, so First fight on the main card. Youngest fighter in UFC history, right? Raul Rosas Jr. versus Christian Rodrigeuz. Man, this fight is... I remember that Chris Curtis was a little bit upset about this one because Raul Rosas Jr. got bumped up to the main card. And, Curtis versus Gastelum is on the prelims. And I understand it, but also from a business perspective, this is just what the UFC does. They have a prospect. The fact that he's the youngest fighter signed is a big deal. And it's going to, and there's a good argument that Gastelum versus Chris Curtis is going to get more eyeballs on ESPN, not ESPN Plus. Like, they're on ESPN this Saturday. That fight's it's going to be in bars all over the place that don't necessarily air the fights, but air the pay-per-views, but they put ESPN on their TVs. Gastelum versus Curtis is probably going to get a lot more eyes than Rosas Jr. versus Rodrigeuz. So there's two different ways to look at it. I mean, I don't know. I don't think the pay-per-view points would have been a big deal here. So I think Chris Curtis versus Gastelum in that head prelim spot is actually a better spot for them. But I digress. Raul Rosas Jr. versus Christian Rodrigeuz. So when we look at Rosas Jr., I think that you really do see, regardless of his age, you see a fighter who's UFC ready. His skill and his wrestling and everything, he's got a lot to polish up and he's got a long way to go. And I think his claims about being able to beat everybody, obviously, at this point are far-fetched. But he has the potential to build himself up, and I love that guy. I love when guys come in with very strong wrestling bases. And Raul Rosas Jr. has that, and I think you're going to see that this weekend when he fights Christian Rodrigeuz. I think we've seen Rodrigeuz give up takedowns throughout his career. Man, I think he's going to have a hard time keeping up with the pace, the pressure, and just the technique of Rosas Jr. The thing that I think that it's like a matter of time before Rosas Jr. gets this fight to the ground and just kind of starts taking over from there in the grappling transitions. The thing that Christian Rodrigeuz does do well is he catches a hold of your fucking neck, man. Like, he'll get onto guillotines and stuff, and you do have to be careful there when Rosas Jr. is shooting for the takedowns. But I don't see Raul falling into those traps. He might catch his head, but I think Raul is going to be able to clear it, and then he's just going to be dominant from top position throughout the fight. I think there is a pretty big skill gap in the wrestling department here, and I think if Raul Rosas Jr. gets offensive, you're going to see him dominate this fight from pillar to post. I think this is going to be a really good showing for him on a UFC card, a big pay-per-view card, right? A lot of big names. A lot of people are going to be tuning into this too. This is a big opportunity for him and a big moment, and I think he's going to get it done. I think it's a favorable matchup for him. Like I've said, I've just seen Christian Rodrigeuz, I've just seen him get taken down too many times, and by wrestlers who are not as talented as Rosas. So I got Raul Rosas Jr. fucking kind of rolling through this one this weekend, man. I think he's going to go out and I think there's going to be a lot of buzz about him after the fight this weekend. I think he gets it done. Next fight is interesting. Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Man, I don't know why, but I have like a hard time putting my finger on Santiago Ponzinibbio. Like whenever, I don't know, like when I try to do these breakdowns and stuff, I just have his fight style, man. I don't know. I don't know. I have a hard time picking his fights for some reason and just deciding who I think might have an advantage. But in this one against Kevin Holland, the way that they've both looked recently, I think I'm leaning towards Kevin Holland, man. I think Kevin's going to be able to snipe him from places that Santiago's not going to be able to get to. I think Santiago might start lunging a little bit with the shots to try to get to Kevin, and Kevin's going to capitalize. The one thing to always watch out for is Holland's wrestling defense is not exactly there. And Santiago tends to keep it on the feet, but it's not like he can't wrestle. So if Holland's not prepared for that or not expecting that in some of these situations, that could be a problem for him. I could see Santiago trying to push this up against the cage a little bit. I don't know. I think standing in space with Holland is going to be a problem for Santiago. I think there's going to be a speed disadvantage, and I think that he's going to walk into a lot of things that Holland's throwing, bite on a lot of feints. Yeah, man. I think it's a tough fight for Santiago all around, and I don't exactly like the fact that he's been getting rocked a lot lately. Like, yeah, he won his fight against Alex Morono, but he got hurt in that. Li Jingliang knocked him out pretty bad. He's been battered around a little bit, man, and Kevin Holland can fucking crack, and he can hit you from places that you can't necessarily hit him, and I think there's going to be a lot of that going on. And like I said, Santiago's preferred method is the stand-up, and I think it's going to stay there. And for whatever reason, gut feeling, whatever, like I said, I have a hard time for whatever reason when I watch Santiago coming up with like how guys are going to deal with him stylistically. I think he's kind of a hard guy to prepare for. But I think that Holland is a guy who's going to be able to come in there and his like striking and, like I said, is kind of like running his mouth is a little bit of an unorthodox style. I think he's going to be able to find his angles and get to Santiago where Santiago can't get to him. And then I think Santiago might start overextending a little bit and Holland can capitalize on those. But I think Santiago is going to be doing a lot of like trying to pressure Holland. So it's going to be on Holland to make sure that he's like using his length and touching Santiago and circling back to the center of the cage too. Like I said, otherwise we might end up, I don't know, maybe Santiago pushes this up against the cage to kind of wear Kevin Holland out a little bit and negate a little bit of that reach. So we'll see. I could see this fight going a few different ways, but I think most likely scenario is Kevin Holland. And Kevin Holland, those elbows when they're in the clinch and stuff, man, you got to watch out for that. I think Kevin Holland gets it done. Next fight is probably the one that I'm most excited for. Not most on the card, but like I'm pumped for this one, man. Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. If you watch Adrian Yanez when he throws his combinations, he might have the smoothest fucking hands in the UFC. I mean, his hands are flying when he's throwing, and they're just like, and it's going so effortlessly from like head to body, back up to head. Like he just like, everything is so tight and compact and fluid, and he's fast as fuck. Here's the thing. Everyone's talking about this being a boxing match. Man, Rob Font can fucking fight. Rob Font is good. I think people are forgetting in this. Rob Font's an underdog going into this. I think he's at like plus 155. Man, Font is good. Font has a really good jab, and he puts a lot of volume on his opponents. And he's been in multiple 5-round fights now. He knows what that feels like, so he's going to be able to pick up the intensity in a 3-round fight. And here's the other thing, guys. We've seen Yanez struggle against guys like Davy Grant a little bit. We've seen Yanez struggle against a guy like Randy Costa, who has a long jab. Rob Font has a long jab. He's got one of the best jabs in the UFC. And I think, this is my opinion, I think Font gets it done. I think Font is going to put the volume on Yanez. He's going to stick the jab in his face over and over and over again. And Yanez might crack him. That's really the thing that's hurt Font. Font will do well in the fight, and then he gets hurt like late in the round or something. That was a theme against Cheeto, right? Who else did he fight where that kept happening to him? Oh my God, I have to look it up. I know it's like right here on my head, but I can't remember. Who did he just, was it Aldo? Yeah, Jose Aldo. Yeah, Aldo kept hurting him. Yeah, but he looks good. He can fight, man. And I think that Yanez is like kind of like more pure boxing style. I think he's actually going to have a little bit of trouble in an MMA fight against Rob Font. I think Rob Font's super talented. There was a point where he was considered among the elite bantamweights in the world. Still is. But I was surprised to see Yanez as such a favorite in this one. I think that this is just my feeling. I think they're going to be... And Font attacks from kind of like different angles a little bit than you traditionally see. That's why I think like the Davy Grant fight was important to look at for Yanez. But man, this is how, like I said, I could be wrong. Yanez could go out there, counter the fuck out of Rob Font every time he comes in, right? But I think we've seen a little bit of trouble from Yanez when he lets his opponents get going first. And Rob Font really likes to go first. Because you can wait to counter, but when you get to the level of the UFC, Rob Font's going to be throwing combinations as well. He's not just going to be throwing one punch at a time. So the counters are kind of hard to come by. That's the same thing with Davy. I know I keep bringing him up, but like Davy Grant will throw multiple strikes from weird angles, right? And if you can put Yanez on the back foot, those counters might not be as readily available for him. I think Yanez, and I know, like I said, he counters, but like I think personally we've seen the best work from Yanez when he pressures his opponents, right? And he goes first and he starts getting feints and stuff going and then drawing reactions out of his opponents and then countering those reactions. A lot of the times in the UFC and in MMA, if you are going first, you will be winning the fight because you're dictating the pace and it's different than boxing a little bit, right? Like where you can let a guy come at you more because you have more, I don't know, there's just more variables in MMA. And it seems like you'll hear DC say it all the time during commentary, like, got to go first. Guys got to go first. Got to go first. I think Rob Font goes first. I think he goes more often, and I think it pays dividends this weekend. I could be wrong. Yanez might fuck him up. Yanez might make Reed slip his head off the center line, pow, 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 and he's hurting Font. I don't know, but my gut feeling is just that Rob Font gets it done. I think we're sleeping on Rob Font a little bit this Saturday. All right, next, Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. This is a huge fight, and there's a lot of debate about whether the winner of this fight could somehow leapfrog Colby Covington and fight Leon Edwards for the title. And I think so, but I think there's only one way it happens. And I don't think it's if Gilbert Burns wins. I think, here's the problem. Masvidal already has a highlight reel of him getting KO'd by Usman, right? That's just like that. That's there. So if Gilbert Burns goes out and does the same thing to Masvidal, I don't think the impact is as big as if Masvidal does it to Gilbert, right? I think this is what I think happens. I think if Gilbert Burns goes out and puts on an impressive show, and let's say he finishes Jorge Masvidal, I don't think he leapfrogs Colby for the fight. I still don't think Gilbert has enough star power behind him even after that win because, like I said, Jorge already has a bad KO loss. So even a highlight reel KO or whatever over Jorge this weekend, I don't think it has the stock that Jorge knocking out Gilbert does, right? Like if Gilbert knocks out Jorge, great. But I don't think the UFC is going to let Gilbert cut in front of Colby. On the other hand, if Jorge can go out and somehow KO Gilbert Burns and get a highlight reel finish with Gilbert Burns, they're going to give Jorge the title fight. Because not only can you promote the entire time the Askren head kick, him starching Darren Till, and now him starching Gilbert Burns, and then you add on top of that the three-piece in the soda, that's your next title fight. If Jorge Masvidal somehow pulls off the win this weekend, I don't even want to say somehow because he's a massive underdog this weekend too, and I think Masvidal could win this fight. Masvidal is a bad motherfucker, man. Masvidal is a bad dude, and he can box. He can pressure box. He uses kicks well. He has good wrestling defense, right? Granted, like against Colby, he got outworked in those situations. But my point is overall, he is well-rounded, and I do think that he has good takedown defense. I just think Colby is a really, really good wrestler. Really, like an elite-level MMA wrestler. So I think that's why Masvidal struggled there. But overall, man, he's good. He's competent in those areas, you know? He'll surprise you sometimes in those situations. Masvidal is in this fight. But if Masvidal knocks out Burns, I'm telling you, and you got to think about the fact that Masvidal is 38, so the UFC knows that the window to promote this stardom is a little bit short. People are going to be excited about him if he picks up the win. The fight's in fucking Miami, right? His hometown. He's going to be like getting fucking showered with love from the fans during this event. If he goes out and picks up a big win, his past history with Leon is going to be enough for him to leapfrog Colby. But if Gilbert wins this weekend, even if he wins impressively, don't expect Gilbert to be the one fighting for the title next. It'll be Colby. That's my thought. Anyway, let's break down who I think is going to win. I think that, like, we kind of talked about it a little bit through that little rant I had, right? But, like, I think Masvidal does a good job of, like, boxing. I think he's going to have maybe a slight advantage on the feet. But the problem is that Gilbert has a lot of power, man. Gilbert has a lot of power in those hands, and some of the shots that he cracked Khamzat Chimaev with might have knocked other men out. And like I said, we've seen Jorge get knocked out now and get knocked out clean and get knocked out bad. And if Gilbert can touch him on the chin like that, man, who knows? Could be able to put him out. So there's going to be that interesting dynamic going on where I actually think Jorge is probably a little bit better, more technical on the feet, but I think that Burns is probably more powerful, and that can be a game changer, and it can make up for a lot, right? I think that Burns is going to go out and win this fight. I think Masvidal has a chance, but it's going to be tough to keep Burns off him, and I think Burns is going to be willing to be aggressive. But, man, Masvidal is a dog. And we're going to talk about this like at the end when I recap everything and we go over the bets I was talking about. But I got to sprinkle a little on Masvidal, man. He's such a big underdog, and I think people sleep on how good he really is. Jorge Masvidal is a very, very, very well-rounded mixed martial artist. Make no mistake about it. Even in situations where he was losing to Colby, he knows what he's doing. He knows what's going on, right? It's just hard to overcome that level of wrestling sometimes. But Jorge is good, man, and I think Jorge could win this weekend. I just think Gilbert is most likely to pull it off, And if Gilbert can start exposing the back at all of Jorge the way that Colby did, like how Colby was kind of crawling on him in those situations and trying to finish the rear naked but couldn't, Gilbert might be able to. Gilbert's got world-class jiu-jitsu, so Jorge does have to be careful not to let Gilbert onto his back. If Gilbert latches onto your back and he gets a takedown against the cage like that, man, Gilbert's scary. Gilbert's got world-class jiu-jitsu, so Masvidal's got to be a little bit more careful of that, but Masvidal's well-rounded, man. I think the thing is that Burns, I think, will have a harder time getting the fight into that situation, because, I think it wasn't necessarily difficult for Colby, but it wasn't easy to keep Masvidal there. And I think Masvidal will have an easier time keeping Burns off him than he did Colby, right? So I'm going with Burns, but I think Masvidal's a live dog. Anyway, main event time. Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya, the rematch, right? We talked about this when we were talking about Volkanovski versus Yair and the game planning, but I think that's the biggest difference maker in this fight. I think that if you try to sit here and analyze who's going to win a striking match, I think, who knows? Who knows? Who knows how this fight plays out Saturday, right? Pereira has incredible power, and like I said, that's always a game changer, right? I think Izzy is the more technical fighter. I think he's the one who sets better traps. He's, in terms of their exchanges, overall, Izzy seems to win, but Pereira just has that game fucking changing power when he connects. It's a difference maker. And he's been able to put Izzy out twice now. Maybe not out in this last one, but man, TKO, whatever, same thing, whatever you want to consider it. So I think trying to predict what's going to happen in that regard is kind of hard to do. But as I was talking about with high-level fighters, the more skilled they get, it almost becomes who is going to come with the better game plan. Izzy has 25 professional MMA fights, guys. It's not like he just started doing this a little bit ago. And he ended up fighting a fight against Alex Pereira where, he cracked him at the end of the first round. But that came after mixing in a little bit of cage work and wrestling, right? Because now you've changed it up. So I think that Izzy, having all of this MMA experience and then feeling Pereira now, is actually going to have an advantage going into this fight. I really believe so because I think that Izzy is going to game plan better than Pereira. And he's going to be able to make adjustments, and he knows what Pereira can bring to the table in an MMA fight now, right? And Izzy, despite the wrestling success in the third, was caught. He was taken down in the second by Pereira. I think that Izzy is going to come with a game plan to not let those things happen and to be more aggressive with his wrestling, more aggressive with his clinch work. And I don't think he's going to shy away from a kickboxing match with Pereira necessarily, but I think that there will be more MMA worked in, especially if you look at the success that Izzy had in the third round in their last fight. I think Izzy's going to wrestle, and I think he's going to have to kickbox too. I don't know that he's going to be able to hold Alex Pereira down for all those rounds. Maybe he is. I don't know. There's going to be moments where he has to kickbox, but the person who brings the offensive wrestling and makes the other person think about it from a defensive perspective is going to have an advantage. And that's why I think you saw Izzy sting Pereira, especially at the end of the first. I think Izzy is capable of setting traps and catching Pereira just on the feet as is. But Pereira has that power and that left hook, man. And good timing and all. Don't get me wrong, all of those things. He's a great kickboxer. I think Izzy is a little bit better from a technical perspective. Like I said, he could set those traps up and maybe hurt Pereira. But Pereira has that game-changing power where he really just has to clip you. If Izzy turns this into an MMA fight and he fights a well-rounded fight where he is using the clinch, and then when they get off the clinch, he's bringing things up top, working the body, working kicks, and then pushing it back up against the cage, changing levels, making him work, coming off the cage, hitting him. If he gets offensive with his wrestling and his grappling, it will open up his striking in those kickboxing exchanges more and more and more. I think Izzy's going to go out and make a fucking statement Saturday night. I think we're going to see Izzy come out. I think we're going to see him. I think he's going to wear on Pereira, and then he's going to start teeing the fuck off on him. I think you're going to see a different fight. And I think Pereira is bigger than Adesanya, but I think that Adesanya is going to come well prepared. I think when you watch like the wrestling and stuff that he's been doing, I think he's coming out. I think he's going to come out and fight an MMA fight. I think he's coming for blood. And I think that he's going to come out with a better game plan. And at this level, after Adesanya's felt him once and I think he knows what it takes to beat him. And I think he's going to game plan more efficiently than Pereira. And for that reason, I like him. Don't get me wrong. Pereira is a bad motherfucker and he could clip Izzy. And like, I could be wrong on this, but I just got a feeling that Izzy is going to come out with that fucking like game plan, stick to it, get the fucking job done. I think he can do it. So, going to be interesting to see, but I got Izzy in this one, man, for that simple reason. So, let's see. Oh, last thing I wanted to do, I just wanted to talk about the bets that I placed real quick, right? So, what I'll do is I'll put a link to like a Google Doc down in the video here, and I break it down into units, right? And I'll keep it simple. Like, I keep it simple rather like if I have $100, one unit in my like DraftKings account, whatever it is, right? If I have $100 in there, one unit is 1%, so it's $1, right? 2 units is obviously $2, and 3 units is $3. The most I would ever bet is $3, 3% of your purse at once, right? So 1, 2, or 3 units. For this weekend, this is how I'm betting. I'm going Rob Font on. I'm actually picking. There are some fights where I pick the other fighter, right? And I'll bet, like I actually think the other fighter is going to win, but there's value in the bet. So I'll place on the guy who I think is actually going to lose. So first fight is going to be Rob Font. I'm putting 2 units on Rob Font, right? I forget what the odds are. I think I got him at plus 155. I have it in weird decimal form in my Excel spreadsheet here. But I'm taking Rob Font, money line, 2 units, just to win outright, right? I'm putting 1 unit on Jorge Masvidal to win outright. Again, that'll return, I don't know what that was. He's like a plus 320 or some shit like that. It's crazy. Kelvin Gastelum, I'm putting 3 units on Kelvin Gastelum money line. I think he's at minus 135 right now. I think he's going to give Chris Curtis a lot of problems. I think that Kelvin Gastelum's really high level, and I don't know. I just have a feeling he's going to dot Curtis up. I'm putting 2 units on Izzy. I'm picking Izzy to win, and I think Izzy gets it done, man. I think Izzy's going to, like I said, come out with a good game plan. I'm putting 2 units on Izzy to win outright. And then here's like my kind of like, I thought about throwing more on this, but I'm just going to place 1 unit on it. I'm betting on Sam Hughes, the money line. She's facing an opponent. Oh my gosh, I forget her name. And of course, it's not popping up here. Who is she fighting next? Jacqueline Amarim. All of Amarim, I think this is going to be Amarim's UFC debut, right? First off. And second, all of her wins have come in the first round. And we've seen her hesitate a little bit, and she's picked up like a lot of submission wins or like, but I think that Sam Hughes despite her record, she has a lot of experience under her belt, and I think she's going to be able to stay pretty calm and collected during this fight. And if she can get out of that first round, I just don't know how Amarim is going to respond. And a lot of the times you see people come into the UFC and they burn too hot too fast, and then rounds 2 and 3, the other person starts to take over. I just think Sam Hughes having that UFC experience is a big, big deal. I think if Sam Hughes can get out of that first round and start to extend this out into rounds 2 and 3, it's just an unknown for Amarim. It's not that I necessarily don't think she's capable of winning or that she couldn't go out there and submit Sam Hughes very first round and do the same thing she's been doing her whole career. But at some point, that will stop. And it could stop in your UFC debut against a girl who knows what she's doing and is fighting in the UFC and has had some fights under her own belt. So I got 1 unit on Sam Hughes. That's how I'm betting the fights this weekend. Anything else that I bet, I obviously didn't publicly get it out in time, so it won't be included on like the spreadsheet that I'm tracking here. But this is like I said, I'm going to track this over the next year, see how it goes. Maybe I'll fucking lose a bunch of money. Maybe I'll make a little bit. Maybe I'll break even. I don't fucking know. Most likely lose money, but we'll see. Like I said, don't don't take my advice on them. Wait for this thing to build and see how the results play out. The only way to do it is to publicly display it and put it out there so that it's like, it seems legitimate to the people who are looking at it, obviously. So anyway, guys, I'm just rambling now. I can feel myself like talking myself out of things to talk about. So I'm going to sign off. Thank you as always for tuning in. Much appreciated. And have a good weekend and enjoy the fights. Bye-bye.